Greetings, folks. This is our community Q&A for June 2024. I am out on the patio here at the apothecary. It's almost 95 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a little clammy today, but I am very excited about the questions submitted for this month. Thank you so much. If you're new to the Q&A, I post a question call over on my Patreon group on the 20th of every month. You have about a week to submit your questions, and then you get to see the answers here in this monthly video. So let's get started. We have 4 or 5 really good ones that I want to get to quickly, as briefly as possible, just because there's a lot. So first, Chris asks, have I ever been asked to do my work in an unethical way? I actually really love this question. I don't know that anybody's ever asked this before. So here's what I think. I don't think I've ever been asked to do my work in an unethical way, but I have certainly been around people working with herbs and working with particular methods of herbalism that I would consider unethical. And I really appreciate that this question is about ethics and not morality, right? Because when we get into morality structures, something is wrong all the time. When we get into ethics structures, something that's right in one situation could be wrong in another situation. So an example of something that I would see as unethical is working with particular plants that are maybe part of closed indigenous practices, or that are harvested only in sensitive parts of the rainforest, or that have to be irradiated or sulfured in order to cross through the boundary to get into the United States, which is like a lot of herbs from India and China. Or herbs that are threatened or endangered. And if you're not sure about what those herbs are, you might be surprised who's on that list. United Plant Savers is always a great resource. So, I've certainly worked with clients who are adamant about working with a particular plant or working with a plant in a particular way, even though I think in that particular circumstance, I don't think it's ethical. And I will try to offer them an alternative herb that's analog to the one they want, or alternative rituals or ceremonies that are more aligned to that person and to where we are. But otherwise, I guess I've been lucky and that nobody's asked me to do anything too crazy. So good question, fun to think about. Have I ever come across a plant that's not friendly? This is a really good question. The short answer is no. Every plant that I've ever, done anything from greeting them all the way through harvesting and doing deeper ritual work with has always been kind, right? But I haven't always been told yes. I've certainly worked with plants before that have maybe the timing was off, or maybe the headspace that I was in, or maybe what was happening with them, wasn't in alignment with the work being done. So I've certainly had particular plants, tell me, no, please don't harvest me right now, or I don't want to do this work right now. I've had experiences where I've been in a copse of scrub oak and, been told no by one particular oak in that stand, but then one 10 feet away, the answer was positive, right? So definitely, gotten answers that I wasn't expecting, or been told no when I was really excited to do some kind of work. But I've never been around a plant that gave me feelings of, animosity or being vengeful or angry. And they certainly have every reason to go into states of anger sometimes with the way that we human folk behave around them. But they have always shown a great deal of kindness and patience and understanding, and I appreciate that. So thank you, good question. Chris also asked about my spiritual herbalism coming out story. This is very interesting to me because I understand that there's a lot of people who are in situations and families and communities where talking about the way they want to engage with plants or work with plants, or the way that plants dovetail with their spiritual practices or traditions, can be problematic. They can open themselves up to a lot of criticism, or being bullied, or just being treated terribly, or outcasted, or whatever. I'm fortunate because, I surround myself with people who are very diverse and different than me, but who are always wanting to be in kinship. They're always wanting to respect what I do as I respect what they do. I have plenty of friends that don't understand my work necessarily and don't maybe even agree with it, but the respect is there and the curiosity is there. Like, even if they don't understand how deep into the work I go, they're still curious about it, and they celebrate the things that I do, and all of that. So I think that's really important, that as we grow up, we get to choose who we surround ourselves by. If your blood family, is crummy about stuff like this, I don't think there's any problem with just making it none of their business. Um, Tell people, only as much as they need to know. Sometimes, because this work is, on the outside, can look different than it feels on the inside for those of us doing it, right? To people looking at us from outside, it can look really pretty wild, I imagine. I've never not done this, so I don't know, but I've gotten feedback from people that are like, "Oh yeah, this looks, a little crazy from the outside." So I try to be understanding. I came to working with plants first through the angle of magic, right? In the mid 90s, being introduced to neo-paganism and druidry and Wicca, and being really fascinated with the way that plants showed up in folklore and in ritual and in magic. Starting out seeing plants in this really reductionist way of like, oh, this herb is good for this in this spell, right? And it wasn't until my late teens that the plants stepped in their more medicinal virtues and really got me through some tough stuff. And then the relationship started to develop. And, I think that I probably stepped into this world slowly, but it's always been consistent. And when I say step into it, I mean like letting people know what I'm doing and sort of how I'm doing it. It's always been there, so it's never been a surprise to anybody, in my family or my community. And now, again, friends and family that I have that don't necessarily understand it, they know what I'm up to. They see me on social media. They know that I've written books, that I do classes, and everybody's always very supportive. So I think whatever your situation may be, surround yourself with supportive people. And I feel like there's this pressure in the world for us to tell everybody everything, and I don't necessarily think we have to. I do think we should always be our authentic self, but in the world, sometimes it's safest to pick and choose who you let know, the nuances of your being. I do believe, this is particularly like showing up in the world as like a queer person, as always being myself, and I don't really take a lot of shit from people when it comes to that. But I also know that if I'm around people who I know are not going to be respectful, I just don't engage. I just don't. I don't give them the opportunity to rain on my parade, so to say. So, very cool question, fun to think about. Thank you, Christine. Was talking about. We just wrapped up an 11-part course on the respiratory system, and one of the conversations that we had in that course was about grief and loss, and how we tend to hold that in the lungs. Christine astutely picked up on the fact that, of course, grief and loss go beyond the lungs, that we can hold those emotions in other places, and that sometimes the allies that we think about for grief and loss are not the ones that really go into the spaces where we need them most. So what I wanted to do, and maybe I'm going to try to do an advanced class on this because it's such a cool topic to explore, and I think it's very, very helpful for people. We all experience grief and loss in different iterations and ways and levels throughout our life. Christine brings this question up because she's going through a lot right now, which I'm sorry to hear. But I want to say this: the deeper level of grief being held in the lungs, in my opinion and my experience, is actually in the pleural cavity. It's like the whole area behind our rib cage, right behind our protective cage. And so we think about the lungs, especially through TCM, of being the seat of grief, and that sometimes people going through grief and loss can't catch their breath, or they feel like they can't take a full breath, or that the air is being pressed out of their lungs, or they have a weight on their chest. And when that's the pattern, then we definitely should be working with herbs that move into the lungs and release grief patterns, help us move through them and work through them in a healthy way. But more often than not, it's a real chesty thing that can go anywhere from the diaphragm all the way up to the throat, right? I've worked with folks in the throes of grief that have plum pit syndrome. They have a lump in their throat that won't go away, or their diaphragm feels so tight that it's not that they can't get a deep breath because of the lungs, but rather that the diaphragm feels like it's too tight to drop, right? To draw the air into the body. And so you see the people breathing with their shoulders rather than their belly. And of course, when we hold grief in our heart center, the seat of our emotions, the place of, the temple of the spirit within the body, this is so hard because when things are in the heart, they are pumped to every fiber of the being. Whatever sits in the chest sits everywhere. And I also think about the stomach. The organ of breaking things down, processing things, chewing on things, trying to make sense of loss. When we lose somebody, trying to make sense of it, trying to process it, trying to figure out how to chew it up and swallow the reality of it, and then how to digest it, how to extract, good memories and the beauty of the person's life, and sometimes even the beauty of death, while also trying to figure out what parts of it we need to release and let go of. I think about the liver, which is kind of also tucked in a little bit, where we hold those hotter reactive emotions, the anger, the resentment. A lot of people going through grief and loss, that's one of the bigger emotions they feel, is they just get pissed off. Like, they're angry that this happened, they're resentful at the situation. And so all of that really is onboarded, especially with deep and abiding grief, or when we have these compounding phases of grief where it's like one thing after another, and like you can't catch your breath. See, there we are using those terminologies again. So let me give you a couple of plant allies that are not often talked about, but these are my go-to for grief, and I'll give you just a little snippet on each one of them because they deserve to be brought into the grief and loss conversation more than they are. And this is coming out of my personal relationship with these plants, my allyship with these particular plants, what they've taught me, how we've worked together. But I am confident that because I can show my work, because it makes sense, that they'll work for other people too. So first is, we of course talk about mullein and mullein leaf, because mullein will cool and soften the lungs and allow for us to breathe through the grief. But mullein is really specific when there's stagnation in the lungs, right? When the person feels like they can't breathe. It's a very lung situation. Then I think about hawthorn. And when we work with hawthorn, we're working with the entire cardiovascular system, from the heart out to the furthest reaches of your fingers and toes. So I like thinking of hawthorn when there's grief feeling in the chest, tightness, weight, heaviness, stuckness, but we're also feeling it everywhere. I've worked with folks going through grief where it's rooted in the chest, and when we do journey work, we find that it's sitting on the chest, but they're also experiencing pain, right? Their muscles ache, their bones ache. It's settled into the whole body. So when we work with hawthorn, we can work with a medicine that moves everywhere the blood flows in the body, right? This is everywhere. And so I highly suggest working with hawthorn berries, leaves, and flowers together, right? Put the whole plant into the medicine if you have access. If not, you work with what you can work with. And hawthorn, as part of the Rosaceae family, this is a rose family plant with a slightly different energy than rose. And we'll talk about rose too. Hawthorn is protective and strong and loud and intense and deep, right? When we need fortification, when we need that bigger medicine to come in during grief, hawthorn. Rose, on the flip side, also part of the Rosaceae family, softer, cooler, quieter, more comforting, a little more slow, right? So sometimes people want that bigger hawthorn feeling, and sometimes people need gentleness. Both of these herbs will work at releasing congestion, tightness, stagnation in the chest so that things can move and be processed, right? This is very, very important. One that doesn't get talked about at all in any of these conversations that I've ever seen is lilac. Lilac is in the Oleaceae family. It's a member of the olive family, right? So connected with olives and forsythia. And lilac blossoms are incredible at relieving pressure in the chest, of opening the heart center, right? So that things don't get stuck and crystallize, but rather they can move and adjust and expand and unfold and eventually reconcile. It's when we hold on to things that they sort of settle to the bottom and start crystallizing, and that's where the problems come. We should feel all of our feelings, right? But not allow them to settle. Feelings are water-based, right? They're a watery, energetic. They should move and move and move, and then we process and learn and experience and remember and gather and release and all those things that emotions are about. So lilac is so incredible. Smelling lilac, working with lilac medicine, very, very helpful. So these four plants, mullein, hawthorn, rose, lilac, are my go-to for grief and loss, and moving through all of that in a way that I feel like is healthy. You know, again, I've seen herbalists talk about grief and loss, all the emotions, anger, sadness, depression, in this way that makes it sound like, oh, we should shut it down. Like, someone's feeling grief, what herbs can we take to stop feeling grief? I never want anybody to not feel grief. If we're not grieving about our losses, about things going on in the world, about we're never going to do anything about it. There's no value. If you don't grieve the loss of somebody, where's the love, right? So I want people to feel all of those feelings, but in a better way, in a healthier way, in a watery way, rather than an earthy, cold, frozen way. There's a difference, right? So these fragrant flowers that help open up the spirit, open up the soul, connect us to the truth of things, to the cycle of life, to the reality of death and birth. They're very, very good allies. So again, sorry for your losses, and hopefully these plants can show up for you in one way or another, however you choose to work with them, to move through and move with your grief. So let's wrap it up there. Thank you guys so much for your questions every month. I really look so forward to this feature. If you want to participate in our online community, there's links below, and stay tuned. We have some really fun stuff coming. Also, if you haven't joined me on my second YouTube channel, there's a link below. I'd love to see you there. Take care, everyone. Blessings of peace and plenty. I'll see you very soon.